Welcome to the North Shore Performance Podcast, where we take a deep dive into health and fitness for everyday people and the athlete in all of us. I am your host, Jake Wirtz, and with me is my best friend and co-host, Tanner Schenkel. Together, we take an honest look at fitness and discuss how anybody can improve their lives by adopting a healthy lifestyle. Welcome back to another episode of the North Shore Performance Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about macronutrients. We're going to continue our series on weight loss, going along with New Year's resolutions and the goals that most people set for this time of year. So today's episode, we're going to be talking about macronutrients. What are they? How do you track them? What's their relationship with everything else when it comes to your diet and stuff like that? So Tanner, you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. So when you hear the term macros, what do you think of right away?
Well, being in this space for a long time, the first thing I think of is like if it fits your macros, bros.
Yeah, no, yeah. Exactly. When I think of it, I remember back when I first started like this weight loss journey. So as like a freshman, I naturally gained my freshman 15. And started working out. That's where this whole journey began. I was actually reaching out to you. You were the first one to explain to me what macronutrients were. So it was like working out, and I didn't really I don't think we really talked about calorie deficit at the time. So I was just trying to like figure out why I wasn't losing weight. And you're like, well, are you tracking your macros? And I'm like, what the heck is that? And you explained to me like when you're trying to cut, you move these macros. The macros are on your protein, fats, and carbs and stuff. And we really didn't talk about calories back then, but we talked more about the macros. So I thought that was interesting. Kind of preparing for this, I remember that moment where you kind of introduced me to this whole different ballpark. And I think people that start taking their macros seriously, it becomes not necessarily, trying to think about how to word this correctly. You become more serious about it because it becomes something extra than just watching your calories or watching just what you eat. Like it becomes more where you have to track, and it becomes part of your lifestyle almost, which I think is kind of interesting, at least from what I have noticed.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that story up. I actually completely forgot about that. You said freshman 15, but it was more like a freshman 25. But that first year out of high school is rough on all of us, I think. So, no, I completely forgot about that. That reminds me of another story. It was my dad, I think it was. He was trying to lose weight, and I think you're over at our house one time, and he goes, "I just don't understand why I can't lose weight." And God bless him, I love him to death. But he was eating these ham sandwiches every day, and it was literally just bread, ham, and butter. And I remember saying, "Dad, you're just eating ham and butter every day. What are you talking about? Of course you're not losing weight." So we have a good laugh about that now because he's actually lost quite a bit of weight too. But yeah, that's a good story. I do agree that calorie tracking is obviously the bulk of what you're going to be doing if you're trying to lose weight and you're serious about it. And that's the route you want to go. You are still going to be in energy deficit. It's all about energy balance, even with your macros. It's just a different kind of way of tracking. And instead of just kind of taking all of your calories for the day and not really giving any credence to how you're eating, like the actual foods you're eating, macros is just another way of kind of looking at it to see if you're on track.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I mean, to start off with, I think everyone kind of understands maybe the bare minimum of what macronutrients are. I mean, you're going to have your carbs, your fats, and your proteins. I think it's important to kind of understand the basics and what they do in your body. So like, for example, carbs is your body's main energy source. It's the preferred energy source always. It's always going to burn carbs before it's going to burn any fat. And it's going to burn that blood glucose after you eat your carbs. Say you ate a baked potato, it breaks down into blood glucose in your body, and then that is what your body is burning as energy. You have your fats, they're kind of your hormone monitoring. They also build up around your essential organs to kind of help protect them. That's going to be your I can't think of the exact term. I just said it a little bit ago, but I don't remember it now. But that's going to be your fat kind of around your abdominal region. And then your protein, obviously.
Subcutaneous fat, isn't it?
Yep, that's what it is. Thank you.
Subcutaneous, yeah.
And then you have your proteins, and those are going to be your building blocks for just muscle in general. They're the kind of laborers of your body. They're going to take amino acids, put them together, and that's what protein is. And they also do some like enzyme transportation or nutrient transportation throughout your body, some different elements in that. So yeah.
So what's the easiest way to explain the difference between macronutrients and micronutrients, do you think?
I always think of taking college econ, and you have your macroeconomics and your microeconomics, and your like macro is more the smaller term, and macro is going to be the complete bigger. So micro is small. For you guys in the phone industry, a micro SIM card is smaller than a full size SIM card, or a macro SIM card, if you will. It just using the root of the word to kind of understand it is how I realized. I don't know. What about you?
Well, I think the easiest way to kind of understand it is macronutrients is like the actual energy that you're consuming. Because when you break down each macronutrient, they each have like an energy, a unit of energy that goes with a gram of fats, carbs, proteins. And a micronutrient is more about your like your vitamins and minerals. They don't necessarily contribute to the actual energy consumption, but they are obviously a vital part of your health and your diet. So that's another thing too we're going to touch on, is just that you can't just look at it as black and white, like, oh, these are my macros and I can eat whatever I want as long as I'm within these parameters. It's like, no, they're a guideline, but you know, if you hold a handful of candy in one hand and a handful of broccoli in the other hand, and you equate them for calories, you know which one's better for you. Like, let's not be ridiculous about it just because they're quote unquote the same amount of carbohydrates and that fits my macros. It's like, no, dude, that's not how it works.
Yeah, exactly. You're definitely going to get more of a micronutrient profile versus something that is naturally made, or like taken from an animal, versus something that is made in the lab, something like that, heavily processed. You're losing out on that macro or that micro profile for sure.
And that's where I think if it fits your macros community, I think that's kind of where they lose some people, because sometimes, not everybody, but sometimes people in that community, they do push that, like, no, you can eat whatever you want as long as it fits in your macros, as long as you hit your proteins and you're within your recommendations or your requirements for your fats and carbs, like, you're good. And sometimes when you push that, you don't help people learn better eating patterns and kind of make better decisions for themselves. It's all about just, did I hit my split? You know, did I hit my split? And it's like, that's just not a sustainable way of eating.
Exactly. I think it's a good idea to start off with introducing someone to it, because then it gives them like the concepts of your simple carbs versus your complex carbs, and helps people kind of start understanding. It's kind of like the whole concept of BMI. Like BMI as a concept is probably only useful for beginners or people that don't lift at all, because it doesn't take in consideration muscle mass. And the same way, kind of, if it fits your macros, like, gives you good ideas and concepts of the food groups you should be consuming at a certain percentage, but obviously it doesn't take into consideration probably more the important profile of it, which is going to be the vitamins and minerals your body needs to survive. Which is kind of interesting. Like, I know some people will see kids eat dirt and they're like, why are they eating dirt? Well, it's because their body's like craving these nutrients. Or like, for example, the reason you can go eat a whole bag of Lay's potato chips, because your body's still craving these nutrients it wants, and you just keep shoveling what it doesn't want, and it's not, you know, it tastes amazing. Your body's craving these micronutrients to make sure your body's functioning properly.
Just to clarify, folks, we do not recommend that you feed your kids dirt.
Unless it's like rich in iron or something. I mean, you might have a nice micronutrient profile in it. Maybe test your dirt first.
I just want to get that out of the way, because I don't want to be getting any emails from concerned parents. And when you start talking about like potato chips and like other foods that are not whole foods, like things we wouldn't consider whole foods, people don't understand that those things are like engineered to be addictive and engineered for your brain to crave and not be able to put down. Like, some of these foods that don't actually exist in nature, your body doesn't really know what to do with them. It's just like, wow, this is a lot of fat. This has a lot of salt. this tastes really good. I just want more of this. Like the three things your body craves above all else is, fats, salt, and sugar. So anytime you can get any kind of combination of those two or three, your body goes crazy for it. Cause it's like, oh, this is what I've been looking for this whole time. It's like in nature, it was really hard to find any one of those three things, let alone in one food together. But now that everything is so modernized and like engineered, it's so much easier to come by. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's interesting I think it either Mind Pump in a podcast or in Sal's book. I know we've talked about this before on the podcast, but like what's easier to eat, a bag of potato chips or a baked potato without like butter and salt?
A plain baked potato.
Exactly. Like the answer is going to be the potato chips.
Of course.
But, and then when you think about what you're consuming as far as just fats in general will blow your mind. And not to mention you're eating probably like 5 potatoes in that whole bag. Like all the food you're consuming and you're still not full after because it's so processed. Like you said, your body doesn't know what to do with it.
Yeah, your brain, your little lizard brain doesn't know how to process what's going on in your mouth. And now that we're talking about potato chips, I'm just craving potato chips so hard right now. So that's the association your brain makes with it, though. It's crazy. Just sitting here and talking about it for 5 minutes has me literally craving potato chips just from a simple conversation.
Exactly. I'm definitely, yeah. Like that's my potato chips are my weak point where I could sit there and eat a whole bag of potato chips with no issue. Like I'm not a big sweet guy, but I love that salt and crunchy. That's my weakness for sure. So what would an example, like what would you use if you're trying to explain to someone what's the difference between a simple carb and a complex carb? Like what would you tell them?
Well, my understanding, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't pretend to be a nutritionist, but my understanding is like a simple carbohydrate is something that's like already in its most basic form, like a sugar, like a simple sugar. A complex carbohydrate is something that's not in a simple sugar state. Is that close to the correct answer?
Pretty much, yeah. It's just based on how fast your body's gonna digest and process like the glucose in it. But yeah, exactly. It's close as far close to being a simple sugar as it can be. Your body's gonna digest it the most. So like a prime example, like a white potato, baked potato is more of a simple base carb versus sweet potato is more of a complex. Or the whole idea of brown rices versus white rice, complex versus simple, stuff like that. Or a bag of candy versus, I don't know, whole wheat noodles. Like it's just how fast your body can process it. Also, the fiber content, I believe, plays a role where a complex carb is going to have more fiber built into it, where more like a simple carb is going to be more, or it's going to have less fiber. So it's going to be easier for your body to digest and burn through quickly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, just thinking about the difference between a complex and a simple carbohydrate. I think I really like the example you use there of like, again, going back to like a bag of candy or versus, something that's like you said, what was the example you used? Like a whole wheat pasta or something like that?
Yep.
Yeah.
So I'm going to the grocery store and say I want to look for something low fat. Is that going to be the optimal solution for me if I'm trying to lose weight? What would you say about that? Obviously, take into consideration, listeners and viewers, that we are not licensed dietitians or nutritionists, but it's based off what we have experienced in the field and just doing our own research.
Yeah, I think that's a trap that a lot of people fall into is they see foods in the supermarket and they're kind of greenwashed, or they're like, I'm trying to think of they're kind of advertised to be healthy, quote unquote. And a lot of times they'll use like the phrasing or the advertising or the marketing, something like low fat or low sugar. And this is kind of a trap because, they're not going to sell you something that doesn't taste good. Hopefully, I mean, depends what you're buying, I guess. But usually if something says it's low fat, it's going to have the sugar content jacked way through the roof because they're still trying to sell whatever they're trying to sell. So they want their product or their food to taste good. But if it's low fat, if it's under a certain amount of your daily recommendation by the FDA, they can label as low fat. But what they don't have to tell you on the front of the box, I mean, if you look at the nutrient label, they have to tell you, but on the front of the box, they're not going to say, oh, but it's high sugar, it's jacked up in sugar. So another example I love to go back to, the reverse of this is a perfect example of this is like Swedish fish. On every bag of Swedish fish, it says it's a fat-free food. So, it's healthy, right? Yeah. So it says it's a fat-free food. And it's like, well, of course it's fat-free. It's literally just sugar. That's all it is. It's all carbohydrates. It's all sugar. So, but it's the reverse of that too. When people say, oh, this is a low sugar option, a lot of times it's going to have more fat in it, because they want it to taste good. So I don't think that's necessarily a great strategy if you're trying to lose weight. But depending on what your macronutrient split, like the split you're trying to go for, maybe you do try to lean into foods that are a little lower in fat or foods that are a little higher in fat.
Yep. Exactly too. And I think a good way to kind of avoid that game they play with the nutrition label, we've talked about before, is just keeping to that one ingredient concept. So like, for example, you're trying to make dinner. Well, let's go. All right, we're going to grab a box of whole wheat pasta. We look in there, there's a couple ingredients in it, whatever it makes to make up that pasta. Perfect. All right, now we're going to go to like the pasta sauce. All right, there's some natural ingredients in there, nothing crazy, nothing you can't pronounce. I know it's not one ingredient, but you know what the ingredients are going into it. Grab some chicken, perfect. You know what that is. Boom, grab a vegetable. Like, if you can eat with the most minimal amount of ingredients as far as like on a box, first of all, it's going to be less processed, so your body knows what to do with it. And also, you're going to get away from that low fat, low sugar game, and you're going to truly understand what you're eating when you eat that way, which I think is important for us. So that food education piece is something that sometimes our society lacks.
I don't know about you, but personally for me, I could probably eat like a meat and a potato for dinner every single day of my life. And I know that's not normal, and my wife hates eating like that. But when I'm trying to track and I'm trying to be on a certain kind of diet or a certain plan, that is typically what I tend to lean towards. So not every day, but that becomes much more common. I have a lot of trouble personally when you start introducing things like a pasta, because it's hard to measure exactly how many noodles you're using or like how much sauce you're using. Cause usually you mix it all together or whatever. And that's a really anal way to look at it. But I find it much easier, much simpler to say, okay, here's my steak, or here's my chicken, here's a potato or some rice, and then here's some mixed veggies on the side or something like that. I could eat like that 90% of the time and be okay.
Yep. I think ultimately that's probably the easiest way to track your macros. One thing I want to kind of throw a jab out there. I will vouch, he's 100% correct. He rarely eats vegetables. This weekend we're together lifting, and he showed me his new notebook. And part of it, you had like a food diary you could write down. I went back like at least 4 or 5 days that he tracked, and the only somewhat like it is a fruit, but there was no veggies. The only thing he ate was a banana in the morning for a fruit. So, I mean, he's not lying when he says that majority of the time he's eating like a meat source and a potato. But no, I think you're 100% correct. It's, first of all, it's easier for you to track. Second of all, again, it's almost minimally processed stuff. I mean, it's really hard to say unless you killed the animal yourself or you grew the vegetables, there's some kind of processing done in it. So to say it's unprocessed is not really true. But obviously minimally processed is the goal. Like you said, like you're a baked potato, pretty straightforward. They probably dig out of the ground, they clean it, whatever, boom, to your table. The meat's processed, cleaned, put in a saran wrap, you buy it from the grocery store, and the vegetables, same thing. Like, it's pretty straightforward. You have a concept of what they did. Now you look at a box of like pizza rolls, for example, you can't pronounce half the ingredients on there because it's loaded with chemicals and preservatives and whatnot. And you truly don't understand what you're eating. But when you're eating something like that, where you can, okay, my carb source is this baked potato, my protein source is the meat. Veggies are also a carb source. The meat has some fat in it. Boom, I hit my 3 food groups. I know exactly how many calories are in this because It's very big, as close to one ingredient items as possible. And I am able to follow my diet plan much easier than if I buy something from a box, or like you said, for pasta example, that's true. It's hard because you're mixing it all together and whatnot. It's hard to truly track what you're consuming. So
Yeah, that felt a little unnecessary, the shot you took at me about the vegetables. I do
I just
eat
thought that was hilarious.
vegetables. You just happen to look at 1 week in my notebook. I don't even use that notebook to track most of the time. I do it on my phone. I do have vegetables, so don't lie to the people about that, okay?
My man doesn't eat vegetables.
Okay, well, kind of getting back to topic though, when we're talking about macronutrients, do you want to explain the difference between each macronutrient, like the actual caloric aspect to it?
I don't know the formula off the top of my head. I know you have that pretty well memorized. If you want to do that, otherwise I
Yeah.
can look it up quick too.
So fats, carbohydrates, and proteins are your three macronutrients. The way that we currently understand them now, through the most up-to-date literature and research, it seems that the consensus is that 1 gram of fats is 9 calories. And that's why you see high fat foods are much more calorically dense. And then carbohydrates and proteins have about 4 calories per gram. So if you were to have 100 grams of just pure carbohydrates, nothing else, that's 400 calories. And then if you were to have 100 grams of protein, that's 400 calories. And then if you had 100 grams of fat, that would be 900 calories. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes exact sense.
So that's kind of how they break down if you're getting down to the very minute details. The interesting thing about that too is if you were tracking, and we've brought this up before, if you're tracking and you take like a chicken breast or chicken thigh, that is an average of what the amount of fat that they expect to come in a chicken thigh or chicken breast, right? So when you track your chicken breast and you're like, oh, it's 8 ounces, well, it's 8 ounces of meat, yes, but they don't know exactly how much fat is in that one piece of chicken, unless you're psychotic and you're like taking everything apart and measuring it like that. But that was just a point I wanted to make. It's like a lot of times you're not eating these foods on their own. Like you're almost never going to find a meat unless you're eating extremely lean. You're never going to find a meat like that's just on its own protein.
Yep.
Meat will come with fat. Different cuts of meat, different animals will have higher contents of fat. And then in nature, most of the carbohydrates you eat are mostly going to be just pure carbohydrates. If you're eating simple ingredients, whole food ingredients, most of them are just carbohydrates. There's not a ton that are both fats and carbohydrates. You do get into like legumes, so like your nuts and your beans and stuff that have a little fat content with it, with a little bit of protein content. But the majority, I feel like, of your plants, I'd say like 70% are probably almost all carbohydrate.
Exactly. When you're looking at like plant-based carbs too, they're going to have some protein in it too, but it's also important to understand that they're not going to have quite the same amino acid profile. So that's what's going to break up the protein. So, I mean, not against being a vegetarian or whatnot. It's important to understand, maybe you supplement with some BCAAs to make sure you're getting the complete amino acid profile that your body requires if you aren't eating any animal-based protein. But that would be the one thing I would add on to that point, where like your plants and stuff, they're mainly just carbs, but there's gonna be some protein. And I think there's like 2 or 3 grams of protein for a serving of broccoli, something like that. So
yeah, the vast majority is carbohydrates, but that's a great point too. It's not all carbohydrates. I may have been exaggerating just a bit, but
last week we showed you guys a website for our last episode, the TDE calculator. And we kind of touched on it, for example, that it also showed like macronutrient splits. And we talked about how we kind of like that. Is this showing up on your screen, Jake?
Yes. Yeah, it is.
All right, perfect. So we kind of talked about like how the tabs also, you can do maintenance, cutting, and bulking. So I just kind of calculated mine real quick at being, I'll be 27 in a month. So we're just going to roll 27, about 230. Didn't eat the best this weekend. So kind of gained some weight here. But But again, shows my TDE just for a refresher. I did moderate exercise. I like the idea that Words talked about. Like I probably, because I train 6 days a week, could fall close to the heavy exercise. But just to get more of a liberal kind of prediction, I think it's smart to go that route where you go more of moderate exercise. But it's here, it's cool because it breaks down your moderate carb, low carb, high carb, and it kind of breaks down with the different splits. This is something you can do on your tracking apps. I know, for example, like we use Carbon, MyFitnessPal. They all allow you to kind of create what you want your macros to be based on percentages, which is super nice. And then you kind of you got to play with it, just similar to the TDE. Like you're not seeing the results you want. Maybe you want to mix up what your macro breakdown looks like as well, just like your TDE based on either calories up, move it down, stuff like that. Maybe you want to play with your splits too. Because some people are going to burn fats more efficiently. Some people are going to burn carbs more efficiently. Some people feel better on lower carbs. Some people feel better on higher carbs. You got to play it because everyone's going to be more. It's going to be more individualized than you really understand.
Yeah, if you look at the breakout there where it says moderate carb, lower carb, higher carb lit up in blue, and it says 30, 35, 35, and then in the lower carb it says 40, 40, 20. That's really just an example of like the percentage. What that is the percentage of your calories coming from those macronutrients. So for example, are you going to go to the cutting page?
Yeah, I'm going to see if it, because it looks like it does it on top here too.
Yeah. Go to cutting. So
there it goes.
For example, if Tanner wanted to cut, and I know Tanner pretty well, so I would assume he'd probably lean towards a lower carb split where it's 40, 40, 20. That's 40% protein, there's 40% fats, and then 20% carbs. Now notice, this is a great example of this, how on that split, it's 129 grams of fat and 145 grams of carbs, but it's 40% fats, 20% carbs. So you might be like, well, how come it says he can eat more carbs than he does fats? Remember, fats are more calorically dense. So for every gram of fat, it's 9 calories. And for every gram of carbohydrates, it's 4. So that's just a really good example of that. But what that is it's just literally a breakout of percentage of all of your daily calories. So for him, his estimate for cutting would be 2,903 calories. 40% of his calories would come from protein, 40% would come from fat, and 20% would come from carbs. And usually when you're cutting, I think even when you're maintaining and bulking, your protein's going to stay relatively consistent. Usually the factor that you're going to manipulate, the variable that you're going to manipulate is going to be your carbohydrates, and your fats kind of just react based off of where you're moving your carbohydrates. That's why for each split, it's referencing the number of carbs and nothing else really. So that's usually the thing that you play with the most, depending on if you're cutting, bulking, maintaining, whatever. But
yeah, exactly. One thing to talk about, part of the reason we like how they break it down so much is it is pretty spot on to kind of how we set up our macros personally. I tend to eat more of a lower carb diet. I would say if you look at the lower carb option here, the 290, that's pretty high for me for protein.
That's a lot of protein.
Yeah, that would be tough. The thing that we kind of are also use protein as not necessarily a cheat code, but we like to eat a lot of protein because for one, it's going to be satiating, it's going to keep us full longer. It also has the most thermetic effect. It's harder, takes more for your body to digest protein. Thank you. Thermogenic. As you guys know on the podcast, there's certain words Tanner cannot pronounce.
That's what I'm here for, folks.
Exactly.
Tanner brings the science, I bring the English.
But so your body's gonna burn through it at a slower rate. So you're not gonna for example, you had a whole bowl of cereal. I don't know, when I was a kid, I would have to eat 7 bowls of cereal to feel full. For protein, first of all, it's gonna be satiating. So it's gonna make you feel full right away. But also in an hour, you're not gonna feel hungry as if you would eat a whole bowl of cereal, because your body's going to burn through that right away, where protein's going to take a little bit longer to digest that.
Real quick, what was your favorite cereal growing up?
Oh, probably either Captain Crunch with the berries, or I'm a sucker for some Rice Krispies with a little sugar sprinkled on and a banana.
Okay. Yeah. I love Captain Crunch, and now as an adult, you're going to make fun of me, but it's so good. It's Raisin Bran Crunch. That's my go-to. It's a little high
Gotta
in the
get that
fiber,
fiber.
though. It's a little high in the fiber though, so every once in a while it's no good. But I love Raisin Bran Crunch. Getting away from that conversation for a bit.
All right. So kind of when we talked about how protein was a cheat code, we both listened to Mark Bell's Power Project, and he talks a lot about protein leveraging. And so that's kind of what we mean by that is using protein. Eating more protein is going to make you more full. It's also going to be building blocks for keeping lean muscle while you're cutting. Also, it's going to keep you fuller longer with that thermogenic effect. Holy cow! I usually can say that word. So that's something to take into consideration when you're breaking down your macro plan here. Is keeping protein the higher side can be kind of that, and you leverage that protein. It's like that cheat code for when you're eating on a lower calorie diet.
Yeah, I love the concept of protein leveraging because if you ever sat down and ate like 100 grams of protein in one sitting, I'm not in the camp to think that those grams of protein are wasted. Like you don't just flush those out of your system for one. I think your body can absorb it. But you're going to be extremely full, maybe even uncomfortably full. So the idea of going and adding more calories on top of that is going to be hard. You're going to be fuller for longer. Protein is the most satiating of the macronutrients. As we've kind of touched on, fats and carbs, especially if they're put together, are extremely easy to overeat. The hyperpalatable food effect, like your ice creams, that's a good example. Your chips, all the good stuff, basically your pizza, like all those things are so hyper palatable because they taste so good, right? But the combination of fats and carbohydrates makes it extremely easy to overeat. So one thing, like you said, we like to use this as a bit of a cheat code. I've actually done this before going out with friends. I'll have like a chicken breast or a protein shake. So when I get wherever we're going, I'm not as full or I'm not as hungry as I normally would be. So like usually, you get to the bar or whatever with your friends, you're like, all right, forget the diet for a bit. We'll get the nachos and then we'll get the burger and maybe I'll get a few drinks or whatever. Well, if you go into your dinner and you've already had a very large feeding of protein right before that, it's going to be a lot harder for you to overeat. Maybe you don't order the giant burger. Maybe you go with like a half sandwich with a salad or something like that. You know what I mean? So it's just another tool in the toolbox to use. I really like doing that sometimes, but
yeah, I like that idea of drinking a protein shake before you go, just because it's going to keep you full, so you're not going to pig out and go crazy because sometimes your eyes are bigger than your stomach. Or if you're already feeling full going into it, it's going to help you not just completely wreck your diet by going out with friends.
Mm-hmm. So another thing I wanted to touch on too was when you look at your macronutrient split, your macros, I like to think of protein as a goal, as a target to hit. And then I kind of think of my fats and my proteins as like those are, that's the cap. That's the highest I would want to go. If I eat underneath those, it's okay. Not too far underneath. Obviously, you don't want to be in too steep of a deficit. But if my protein marker for that day or for that, whatever split I'm doing is like 215, 220, I'm trying to eat up to that 215 or that 220 grams of protein. And then my fats and carbohydrates, I'm trying to eat underneath that. It's kind of a limit for those things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I like how you fill in everything else with after your protein comes in. Because I mean, ultimately, your body really doesn't store protein traditionally like it will fats and carbs. So if you're eating your protein markers, and especially if your goal is to lose weight, you're going to find some success with that as long as you're not overeating the carbs and proteins. But if you're hitting your protein marker because it keeps you so full, it's going to be hard to kind of overeat those. So.
Absolutely. Do you want to kind of touch on like some of the, I don't know, misnomer, some of the misconception that a high fat diet necessarily means that you're going to put on a lot of body fat? Do you want to explain the difference there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on what you're partnering up. So if you're eating a high fat diet and you're eating a moderate amount of carbs, yeah, you're going to put on weight just because your body's going to be storing two macronutrients. Holy cow. Whereas if you're eating more of like a keto style diet where you're going to eat high fat but low carb, Well, eventually your body's going to go into ketosis where it's going to burn fat as its primary energy source, and start producing ketones. Well, then your body is not storing fat because now it's using it as an energy source. It's kind of the partnership of those two. When you're eating together is really when it's going to have a negative effect for your weight loss goals. Like, I'm not saying you have to be extremely low fat, extremely low carb, one or the other, but it's understanding that relationship. That's why, like, you look, say for a hamburger, for example, or a cheeseburger. So you have it. We just talked about protein's good for you. So blah, blah, blah. But now you add a bun to it, which is going to be a simple carb. Unless you're eating like a whole wheat bun. You're going to put cheese on it. The burger itself is going to have fat. So you're adding a large amount of carbs and fat already by eating that. Yeah, the protein's there, so that's great. But it's the combination of those two other macronutrients that is causing you to truly put on that weight that you don't want. So it's important to kind of not pick and choose one or the other. I think you have more of a balance, but when you go in there to have that balance, understanding what the negative effects of both of them. So like, say you want to eat, like, this is probably not exact math, but just for easy to understand, like for every 2 grams of carbs, like have like maybe a half a gram of fat, something like that, where you're not eating a lot of both, because that's when you're going to run into trouble.
Yeah, and that's really comes down to personal preference, because you're talking about the difference of, say, like a ketogenic style macro split, where you're going to have moderate protein, your 30 to 35%, that might even be high. And then you have, the 40, 45% of your calories coming from fats, but then you're dialing down the carbohydrates to that 10 to 15%. So if you eat high fat and you're still trying to cut, that's okay. You would just want to cut your carbohydrates back. And then inversely, if you're somebody that you like eating higher carbohydrates, then you would have to dial your fat content back. Really, we're not going to play too much with the protein, because I do think it's important to hit that consistent mark for protein, whatever it is that whatever your goal is for that. I think you want to keep that relatively the same, but those other two are what you're going to kind of play with. And that really comes down to personal preference, like we said.
Yeah, exactly. And ultimately, in my experience, you can't really go wrong if you're hitting your protein markers and you'd fill in the rest. It's really when you're eating at that energy surplus and going over is when you're going to start burning the fat. Because if you're eating at an energy
deficit,
I'll think of my words today, deficit. Thank you. Holy cow. You're going to be burning that. You're not going to be storing. So it's important to understand, yeah, macros are important to consider, but also understanding the energy balance as well. So it's kind of like you're kind of going through different steps. That's kind of what the series is it all starts with calories. Now it's understanding what those calories add up to for what we eat, based on like making sure our calories, we're efficiently using our calories to benefit us. So high protein. And then from there, it's our energy source, making sure we have enough energy to not feel like crap for our workouts, stuff like that. So, and then it just learning about nutrition and weight loss in baby steps, and it's like building blocks. So we're building on to the next step in our weight loss journey by now learning about macros and understanding how they affect us.
Yeah, really, the series is kind of building on itself. Last week we did talk about calories and an energy balance, and then this week we're talking about macronutrients. They are one and the same. Tracking macros is a way of counting calories in a sense, right? Mm-hmm. But ultimately, if you're trying to lose weight, you have to be in an energy deficit, right? That is for certain. Your macronutrient split really doesn't matter if you're in a deficit. If you're trying to lose weight and you're in a deficit, it doesn't matter what you're eating. Now, there is an optimal way to do it, and there's suboptimal ways of doing it, right? So that's why we're prioritizing protein. We're trying to hang on to as much lean muscle mass as possible. So we're going to keep our protein moderate to high, and then we're going to dial back the carbs or the fats to try to get us into the deficit in the first place, right? Mm-hmm. So it really doesn't matter what kind of split you use, whatever is preferable for you, that's what's going to be easiest. So, for example, for me, and we talked about this actually before we got on, I've been playing around with more of a balanced macronutrient split. So I've been eating moderate carbs, moderate fats, and keeping my protein about the same. but I've been having such a hard time sticking to that because it's very easy to overeat for me when I allow a higher number of carbs into my diet. So if I'm in that 200, 250 range for carbohydrates, I find it very easy to overeat on things. So maybe for me, because I always seem to be a little bit more consistent with that lower carb approach, being more in that 150, 120 range for carbohydrates, and then raising my fats a little higher, because that's easier for me to stick to. That's probably what I should do, right? It's whatever feels the least restrictive.
Yeah, no, I agree, because if it's gonna be restrictive, you're not gonna want to eat it. Like,
exactly.
In the end, like it's keeping it as close to how you normally eat that's gonna make you feel the most comfortable, stuff like that. But also making sure you understand the energy balance into it. Make sure you understand how the macros are playing to it. Make sure you're eating a good micronutrient profile, which obviously it's easier said than done. But it's having just an understanding of the food that we're consuming and how it affects our body, for either for the positive or the negative. So,
all right, Tanner, what's your split right now look like?
So my splits right now is I'm at 230 grams of protein, 300 grams of carbs, and 100 grams of fat. Is kind of what I've been playing around with. I'm trying to do more of a moderate carb approach, or maybe a little bit of a heavier carb approach to see how it affects my performance in the gym and just energy levels. But we will see. And it just gives me a little more options at the end of the day, to have dinner with my wife and stuff like that. That's kind of the hard part I've experienced when I eat low carb. Is it's very hard to kind of enjoy the same dinner with your loved ones if they're not following the same program. So try to keep that more of an average approach and see if that works for me.
Yeah, right now I'm in that 26 to 2,700 calories range. I'm currently on a cut. My protein is usually anywhere between 200 and 215, 20 grams of protein. My carbs, like I said, we've talked about, I'm trying to get it between 130 to 150. I'm taking a lower carb approach, and then I kind of fill in the rest with fats, but that usually puts me at like 115 grams of fat. So that typically has worked for me in the past. I've done keto before, and that worked for me for a while. It's just very hard to stick to because it's pretty restrictive. But that's currently what I'm doing right now, and that's typically the approach I try to take when I do go on a cut.
Exactly. However, though, starting in about a week, I will be attempting a month of a carnivore diet. So that should be interesting. Kind of excited to see what my results will be. I'm gonna try to record as much data as possible to kind of see how it affects me. Obviously, your standard like all body fat percentage, weight loss, that kind of stuff should be tracked. But I'm gonna try more in like measuring my waist circumference, stuff like that, and kind of see a true approach and see how it really worked. Keep track of all my macros, what I'm eating in a day, for science, and see if we can take the information and put some interesting content out for you guys. So
yeah, for the record, my wife did not want me to go carnivore. It would be too hard for us to eat dinners and stuff, kind of like you talked about. So I will not be joining you on your voyage this time, maybe in the future. But I think it's kind of interesting. You were just talking about how you're eating 200 to 300 grams of carbs right now, and you're going to bring that down to basically zero here pretty soon.
Oh yeah, it should be interesting to see what the energy levels look like, stuff like that. It's probably gonna be a struggle the first week as my body adjusts to ketosis and whatnot. But I'm kind of excited. It's gonna be very simple. It's gonna be easy to meal prep, stuff like that. That stuff I'm kind of excited about. And plus, I love like steak and bacon and eggs, and so I think I'll enjoy eating that way. We'll see how my body feels about it. Because heard some horror stories about some bowel movement issues and such, but I'm excited to kind of see. Like, I've seen some insane like results. Like, I know Joe Rogan, I just watched a video on him. His after effect, he dropped like 12 pounds, and like you could see the weight loss visibly on his body. Like, you could see the before and after. It was crazy. So we'll see. Obviously, I probably can't afford to eat the kinds of meat that Joe personally gets. I know he's a big elk guy, and I do have no elk on me. So sometimes probably with this diet, it could be like the meat quality could be something that gets some different results. So we'll play. I'll be probably going to Costco quite a bit to get plethora of a lot of grass-fed options and try to go organic with it. And we'll see how it goes. I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see if you have any difficulties eating enough, because when you are eating just meat, it's very, very satiating. It's very, very filling. So you're probably going to have, I mean, I don't need to tell you what to do because you know what to do. But when you do a carnivore approach, you're not going to be eating a ton of like lean meats, right? You can't waste a meal every day on like chicken breast, because 8 ounces of chicken breast, you're at like 240 calories. Well, just to maintain your body weight, you have to eat, what was it, 2,900 calories for a cut, right? So if you just want to maintain your body weight, you'd have to eat well above 3,000 calories. Well, if you're eating an 8-ounce chicken breast and it's only 240 calories or whatever it is, it's like you're going to get full pretty quick. So I'm very curious to see how that goes. If you track very, very accurately, I'm interested to see if you find yourself eating way less because you are full. And I am also interested to see just how much weight you would drop in a month. So
I think I'm gonna play around with it too, like having like a serving and a half of like a fatty meat, and then do like also like either half a serving or some of like a seafood or salmon or a leaner meat, to try to get different, like, because obviously seafood's gonna have more of the omega-3s in it and stuff like that. So make sure I'm still getting some different variety. But play with it. We're gonna see how it goes, and I'll try to document as much as I can and kind of document the things that I think will be interesting to look at and kind of go over. And that's kind of still brainstorming what information would be interesting. But yeah, so we're going to play with that this upcoming month, starting March 1st. So
awesome. Well, folks, that pretty much wraps it up for us today. Thanks for checking us out. Make sure to drop a like, share, subscribe, the whole drill. Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. Thanks for watching again. So we'll see you guys next time.
And for you guys listening on Spotify, please leave us a review. That's going to help us get with the algorithm. It's pretty much, from what I understand so far in my little amount of research I've done, it's very review based. So 5 stars. If you got some information on it, please share us. Let us get us out there. Now that we're on Spotify, we're going to work on try to get on Apple Music, some of the other main platforms for podcasting. But we're trying to get out to as many listeners as possible, and try to help as many people as possible. So keep that in mind when you're listening. If you found our information useful, please give us 5 stars, and we'll keep putting on content for you guys.
All right. Just remember, no excuses.
And no regrets. Have a good day.
See ya.